I'm a 28-year-old guy, and for most of my life, I believe my mother died in a car crash when I was 10. That's what my father told me. One rainy afternoon after school, he sat me down and said there had been an accident. He told me she was gone and that it had happened so fast, there was nothing anyone could have done. I didn't get to say goodbye. I didn't go to the funeral. I wasn't even allowed to see her one last time. He said it was a closed casket because of the injuries. I was too young to question any of it. And just like that, my entire world changed. Not long after my father remarried, my stepmother moved into our house less than 6 months later. She was strict, always had a forced smile on her face, and made sure I knew the rules had changed. From then on, things became quiet and controlled. Conversations about my mother were off limits. Anytime I asked about her, my father either changed the subject or gave me short, cold answers like let the dead rest. My stepmother was worse. She treated even the mention of my mother like it was some kind of betrayal. I only had one photo of my mother. It was an old picture, slightly faded, with her smiling while holding me as a baby. I kept it hidden inside a notebook I never used, tucked deep in the back of my desk drawer. My stepmother once caught me looking at it and got so upset. She accused me of trying to stir up problems. After that, I never brought it out again. They told me she had no surviving family. No siblings, no parents, no aunts, no cousins. The funeral, apparently, was very small. My father said he arranged it alone. He claimed that she was cremated and that the ashes were taken care of. I never saw an urn. I never saw a single condolence card. It was like she had been erased from the world overnight. When I was around 13, I asked if we could visit the site where the accident happened, or maybe where she was buried, just to pay respects. My father got angry and told me I was reopening wounds that didn't need to be touched. My stepmother said I was disrespecting the dead and warned me to stop before I made things worse. After that, I just stopped asking. I went through high school just trying to move on. I convinced myself there was no point digging into it. They had made it clear that the subject was closed. But little things never sat right with me. Sometimes my memories didn't line up with what I'd been told. I remembered her singing to me on my 9th birthday, but according to their timeline, she was already in and out of hospitals by then. I remembered seeing her pack a suitcase once and crying, but no one ever mentioned her being away before the accident. By the time I got to college, I started therapy. My therapist encouraged me to journal and explore parts of my life I hadn't processed. So I started writing things down, everything I remembered about my mother, the strange way her death had been handled, how quickly my father remarried, how no one ever talked about her. I never showed the journal to anyone. I kept it locked in a drawer and wrote in it only at night, when I was alone. Over time, my relationship with my father and stepmother got colder. They didn't approve of the people I dated, the jobs I took, or the fact that I chose to live in a city far away from them. We spoke only occasionally. I kept the contact minimal, just enough to avoid drama. The only connection I kept was through a few paternal cousins on social media. We weren't close, but I stayed in the loop through them when it came to family weddings, births, and other updates. A few weeks ago, one of those cousins got married. I wasn't invited. We hadn't talked in years, but someone from the family posted a video in the extended group chat. It was a typical wedding video, people laughing, dancing, hugging, all filmed in slow motion with cheerful background music. I almost didn't watch it, but I clicked out of curiosity and let it play while I was making lunch. Halfway through, during a wide shot of guests clapping and cheering for the newlyweds, something caught my eye. A woman in a light blue dress, seated at one of the tables. She wasn't dancing, just smiling and clapping along. For a second, I thought my brain was playing tricks on me. I rewound the video and paused on the moment where her face was fully visible. The hairstyle, the smile, even the way she tilted her head while laughing. It all looked exactly like my mother. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I played it again, slower this time. She was surrounded by guests I didn't recognize, none of them from our side of the family. And yet, she was right there, front and center in the crowd, alive, smiling, like she'd never disappeared at all. That moment flipped everything I thought I knew upside down. I didn't know who she was with or why she was there. But I knew one thing with complete certainty. If that was who I thought it was, then my mother wasn't dead. And someone had lied to me for nearly 20 years. The moment I saw her in that video, I couldn't think about anything else. I replayed the wedding footage again and again, each time pausing at the frame where the woman in the blue dress appeared. I zoomed in on her face, watched how she smiled, how she clapped to the beat of the music. The angle wasn't perfect, but there was something so familiar about the way she moved, the way her head tilted slightly to the left when she laughed. It was small, but it stood out. She was seated at a round table off to the side, surrounded by people I didn't recognize. I paid close attention to the rest of the crowd near her, no one from our side of the family. When the bride walked by, the woman stood and clapped softly, smiling like she genuinely cared. It looked natural, like she belonged there. That made it even stranger. I took a high-quality screenshot of the moment her face was most visible. Then I pulled out the only photo I had of my mother, the one I'd kept hidden for nearly 2 decades. I scanned both images and ran them through a free online facial recognition tool. I didn't expect much, but the result hit me hard. The tool said there was a 94% match. Same bone structure, same eyes, same chin. That night, I messaged the cousin who posted the wedding video. I asked him casually who some of the guests were, especially the ones sitting near the bride's table. At first, he responded normally, giving vague answers. Said it was mostly the bride's extended family from her mother's side. I then asked directly about the woman in blue. His tone shifted immediately. He said he wasn't sure, probably one of the bride's distant relatives. I pressed again. A few minutes later he left the chat. When I tried to message him again, I saw I was blocked. That only made things worse. I created a second account with a different name and profile picture and messaged another cousin who had attended the wedding. This one was always a bit friendlier. I asked the same kind of questions, slowly working my way to the woman in blue. He replied that she came as part of someone named Aunt Samira's side. I had never heard that name before, and I'd been told for years that I had no relatives on my mother's side. Zero. No aunts, no uncles, no cousins. I asked who Aunt Samira was, but he didn't answer. After that, he stopped replying altogether. His account stayed online, but he left the conversation. I started digging through all the tagged posts and photos from the wedding on social media. In one group photo, there she was again. Same dress, same table. The caption read, "Lovely catching up with Samina after all these years," followed by a few emojis. Her account wasn't tagged, just her name, but it was a clue. I typed the name Samina into multiple search tools, adding the city where the wedding was held. After about 30 minutes I found a national ID record for a Samina Reza. The photo matched. The age matched what my mother would be now, and her listed address was only 4 hours away from where I live. I didn't tell anyone. Not my father, not my stepmother, not even close friends. I said I was going to visit a friend over the weekend and packed an overnight bag. I wrote down the address from the database and planned to drive up there quietly. No big plan, no confrontation. I just needed to see if it was really her. The day before I left, I printed out the screenshot of her from the video. That night, I showed it to my father while we were both in the living room. I told him I came across this while watching the wedding clip. He took one look at the photo and his expression changed immediately. His hand started shaking. His face went pale. He didn't ask who it was. He didn't deny anything. He just stood up, walked out of the room and slammed the door behind him. He didn't say a single word. I didn't follow him. I sat there with the photo in my hand, looking at the same smile I used to see before everything went dark. I stayed up most of the night reading every document I had, every note I ever took, comparing names and timelines. The lies were finally starting to unravel, and for the first time in years there was a real lead. The next morning I left early without saying goodbye. I filled up the gas tank, set my GPS, and drove 4 hours without stopping. The entire ride I kept thinking about the moment I'd knock on that door. If this woman really was my mother, it meant someone had gone to terrifying lengths to erase her, and I was finally going to find out why. I arrived in the city early Saturday morning, just after sunrise. The address I had written down led to a quiet neighborhood, nothing unusual, just rows of similar-looking houses with small front lawns and parked cars lined up on both sides. I drove past slowly and found the place. It was a modest single-story house with white walls and a brick porch. The garden in front was clean and trimmed, with a few flowering plants along the edge. A wind chime hung from the front eave, swaying gently. Everything about it looked peaceful, normal. I didn't stop right away. I kept driving and parked a few houses down, close enough to see the porch, but far enough not to draw attention. I sat there for hours with my windows slightly cracked open, watching in silence. Around noon, a woman stepped out of the house with a watering can. She walked to the garden and began watering the plants one by one, humming quietly. The moment I saw her, I knew. Same posture, same way of standing with one hand on her hip. Her hair was tied back in a loose bun, just like in the photo I had. She moved slowly, and I noticed a slight limp in her right leg, something I remembered from when I was little but hadn't thought about in years. I pulled out my phone, zoomed in, and snapped a few pictures. Then I compared them side by side with my old photo. The mole near her jaw was still there. The resemblance wasn't close, it was exact. Instead of walking up to her immediately, I waited until she finished watering the plants and walked down the street. I followed at a safe distance. She stopped by a small convenience store on the corner. Inside, I watched her pick up a few things: milk, bread, a small carton of eggs. She smiled and chatted with the shopkeeper, like they knew each other well. Then, she turned to a young girl standing nearby and used a nickname, one I hadn't heard in almost 2 decades. It was what she used to call me when I was a kid. I didn't think anyone else even knew it. I left the store quickly and returned to my car. I sat there, shaking. I didn't need any more proof. That was my mother, alive, right in front of me. Not a memory, not a photo. She had never died. I went back to the hotel that night and barely slept. The next morning, I returned to the house, walked up to the front door and knocked. After a few seconds, the door opened just slightly. She peeked out. I gave her my first name only. She stared at me for a long moment. Her eyes widened. She whispered something under her breath, barely audible, but it was enough. Then she shut the door. I knocked again gently. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't demand anything. I waited. Then the lights inside the house switched off one by one. No more footsteps. No more movement. I stood there for another few minutes, then reached into my bag and pulled out a small notepad. I tore out a page and wrote a short message. I left it at her doorstep, folded around my phone number, and wrote just one line, asterisk. If you are who I think you are, please. I just want to talk. I don't need anything else. 3 days passed. I didn't hear a word. No calls. No messages. I checked my phone 100 times a day. I didn't contact her again. I didn't want to push. I just waited. With no other choice, I drove back to my hometown. The moment I stepped into the house, I knew something was off. My father's car wasn't in the driveway, the front door was unlocked, inside the living room was untouched, but his usual things, his laptop, phone charger, keys, were gone. I asked my stepmother where he was. She shrugged. Her tone was cold, even more than usual. She said he left a day ago without a word. She claimed she didn't know where he went. Then she looked me straight in the eye and told me to stop digging. Said I didn't understand what I was doing. Warned me that some things should stay buried. I didn't argue. I didn't respond. I went to my room, closed the door, and sat down in silence. Something was unraveling, and it was happening faster than I expected. The lies were no longer just part of the past. They were collapsing in real time. My father was gone. My mother was alive. And I was standing in the middle of a secret no one thought I'd ever find. I started digging deeper the morning after I got back. I called the public records office and requested a search for a death certificate under my mother's name, using every variation I could think of: maiden name, married name, spelling errors, everything. 3 days later, I got the official response. Nothing existed. No death certificate. No funeral registration. No coroner report. I didn't stop there. I searched archived newspaper articles, hospital discharge summaries, police reports, even fire department logs, anything that could match a fatal car accident around the time I was told she died. Not one record had her name. Not even close. The story I had believed my whole life didn't exist on paper anywhere. I printed out everything and brought it back to the house. My stepmother was in the kitchen. I placed the papers on the counter in front of her. She skimmed them without saying a word for a while, then told me it must have been some clerical mix-up. She warned me not to dig up things that would hurt the family. When I asked again, calmly she said I was trying to destroy everything they had built over the years. Then she turned and walked out. That night, I got a message on one of my old accounts. It was from my father's sister, an aunt I had maybe spoken to twice in my life. She had seen the wedding video too. Her message was short but urgent. She said she needed to talk. We spoke on the phone for over an hour. She told me the truth. My mother hadn't died. Everyone close to my father had known. After a long and bitter divorce, things spiraled. He told the family my mother was unstable and dangerous. Claimed she had mental breakdowns and couldn't care for me. There were arguments over custody. He pulled every string he had to make her look unfit. My grandfather got involved too. He had connections in the legal world and didn't want a messy case dragging the family name into gossip. My aunt said the funeral was fake. There was no body, no burial, not even a priest, just a small get-together at a distant relative's house where my father announced she had passed away. He told everyone to spread the word and not ask questions. Most obeyed. A few didn't believe it, but no one had proof. And no one dared to speak out, afraid they'd be cut off from the family. She sent me an old email thread she had saved from years ago. It was between my father and a family lawyer. In it, they discussed making sure Samina is out of the picture for good. They used vague language, but the message was clear. They planned it. It wasn't a mistake or confusion. It was deliberate. I asked her if there was ever any violence, anything that made my mother unsafe to be around. She said no, just emotional stress. Isolation. A woman who was broken down and left with no support. My father took advantage of that. I didn't wait any longer. I packed a bag and drove back to the city where I had found her. This time, I wasn't looking for answers. I needed to see her again. I needed her to know I was there. When I knocked on the door, it opened after a few seconds, but not by her. A teenage girl stood there. She looked unsure but not afraid. She introduced herself as Zara. She told me her mother was inside but nervous. Then she stared at me a little longer and said something I didn't expect. "We have your picture in the photo box." She stepped aside but didn't invite me in. I could hear footsteps behind her, and a shadow appeared near the hallway. My mother stood behind her, not speaking, barely moving. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She just stood there, frozen, staring. Zara looked at her, then looked back at me. She said her mother wasn't ready to talk, but she had been expecting this day in some way. I nodded and didn't push. I took out a sealed envelope from my jacket pocket. I handed it to Zara and told her it had my phone number and a short note inside. Just a few words: I just want to know the truth. Nothing else. Then I turned and walked back to my car. I didn't look back. I didn't knock again. This wasn't going to be simple. But I had started something that couldn't be undone. The people who lied weren't going to be able to hide anymore. And the one person who was supposed to be gone was standing just a few feet away, real, alive, and holding on to years I had lost. A week after I left the note with Zara, she called. Her voice was calm but cautious. She said her mother was willing to meet, but only in a public place. She suggested a quiet cafe near a park in her city. I agreed without hesitation and drove down the next morning. The cafe was nearly empty when I arrived. It had outdoor seating under large umbrellas and overlooked a small pond with ducks floating across the water. I got there early and chose a table facing the entrance. About 15 minutes later, Samina walked in. She spotted me right away and walked slowly to the table. She looked exactly like I remembered, older, of course, but not unfamiliar. She sat down across from me, her hands slightly shaking as she reached for the glass of water already on the table. She spoke first, without hesitation. She said she never stopped thinking about this day but had given up hope that it would ever come. Then she told me what happened. Everything. After the divorce, things got worse very quickly. My father began threatening her with court action if she even tried to reach out. He used her postpartum depression as leverage, telling people she had mental issues. In court, he claimed she was unstable. She didn't have money for a lawyer, and when her former father-in-law got involved, things moved faster than she could fight. She was told that if she didn't disappear, she would lose everything, including custody permanently, and face public humiliation. She said she tried to contact me over the years. She wrote letters, dozens of them. Every birthday, every school year, every holiday. She handed me a small box filled with envelopes. None of them had stamps. She never mailed them. She said every time she tried, the letters were returned or ignored. Phone calls never went through. A legal request she submitted when I was a teenager was rejected outright. No explanation. Just silence. She admitted she came to a few school events, just to see me from a distance. One time she watched from the back of a crowd during a sports event. Another time she saw me through the window of a bookstore. She never approached. She said she was warned that if she did, she could be charged with harassment. At one point, when I turned 18, she asked a mutual friend if they could help her reach out. That person said doing so would stir trouble and open legal issues again. She showed me a folder with old photos, letters, even a lock of hair from when I was a toddler. She had kept everything. I didn't say much, I just listened and watched her go through years of silence in a few minutes. She told me she remarried once, briefly, but it didn't last. She focused on raising Zara alone. She never wanted to bring another person into the mess her life had become. Toward the end of the conversation, I asked her if she would be willing to speak on record. Not to go public, but to document everything. She nodded and said she would. She gave me the name and number of a close friend who had witnessed the fallout during the separation, someone who stood by her when no one else did. We sat in silence for a few moments before standing up to leave. At the corner of the cafe near the parking lot, we paused. She reached forward and hugged me. It wasn't dramatic, it was quiet, long, and full of everything words didn't need to cover. Then we went our separate ways. I drove straight back to my hometown. I didn't go to my father. He was still missing, but my stepmother was home. I walked into the living room and pulled up a video I had taken at the cafe, a short clip of Samina showing the box of letters. I pressed play and held out my phone. My stepmother didn't even watch the full 20 seconds. She reached forward and slammed the door in my face without saying a word. I stood there for a moment. Then I opened my contacts, found her name and deleted it. I erased every saved number, every email, and every message chain. I walked out of the house without turning around, without packing anything. I didn't leave a note. I didn't say goodbye. There was nothing else left to say. That chapter was over. I had lost too much time already, and I wasn't going to let them take any more. After cutting ties with my stepmother, the next step was legal. I hired a law firm that specialized in family documentation cases and civil disputes. I explained everything from start to finish and showed them the folder of evidence. My mother's box of letters, the wedding video screenshot, the message from my aunt, the fake funeral email chain, and the confirmation that no death certificate had ever been filed. They agreed the case was highly unusual, but legitimate. With my mother's full consent, we filed a formal request to the registrar's office to have her public records corrected. The form included a sworn statement from her, copies of her government-issued ID, proof of address, and a letter from our legal team explaining the discrepancy. The main argument was simple. There was never any official death record to begin with, so her status should be officially recognized as alive. It was the first time her name had appeared in any official family paperwork in almost 2 decades. Word spread quickly through the extended family. A few cousins started sending messages, some apologizing, some pretending they didn't know anything. One distant relative, who I hadn't seen in over 10 years, admitted he always thought something felt off about the way the funeral was handled, but didn't feel he had the right to ask questions. Others stayed quiet. One afternoon, our legal team received an anonymous letter. It didn't name anyone, but the message was clear. Drop the case, or risk public embarrassment and damage to reputation. My lawyer traced the origin of the email through metadata. It came from an IP address linked to an employee of the law firm my father used to work with. That employee was reported, and we filed a formal complaint. Screenshots and digital logs were backed up in case anything else happened. Not long after, one of my cousins invited me to a small birthday dinner at her house. I asked if it would be okay for Samina to come. She said yes. It was the first time the two of us were in a family setting together. When we walked into the backyard, a few people stopped talking. Some watched us from a distance, but others came forward. One woman hugged my mother. Another cousin said it was good to finally see things make sense. Not everyone approved, but it was a shift. Her existence was no longer a secret. Later that evening, one of my uncles pulled me aside. He looked uneasy but said he needed to tell me something. He confessed that he had been part of the group that helped organize the fake funeral. He had done it under pressure. My grandfather, who passed away a few years ago, had made it clear that protecting the family name was more important than truth. The uncle said he always felt guilty and offered to testify if it came to that. The next day, I received a text message from a number I didn't recognize. It was just one sentence from my father: "You're making a mistake. None of this is true." That was the only message I got from him. I didn't reply. I blocked the number and made sure it was permanently filtered. That was the last time he would ever be able to contact me. After that, I focused on my mother and Zara. I started visiting them every weekend. We made dinner together, watched old movies, and slowly filled in the blanks of the years we lost. Zara invited me to her school recital and introduced me to her friends as her older brother. I met her teachers. We took pictures afterward, all three of us. One afternoon, Samina brought out a shoebox she had kept hidden at the back of a closet. Inside were old birthday cards, baby teeth in a little plastic bag, drawings I had made as a toddler, and photos I had never seen before. There were pictures of me playing with her in the garden, asleep on her chest, holding my first set of building blocks. She had kept everything. My lawyers told me that with everything we had, documents, testimony, and digital records, we had enough to file a civil lawsuit. Not for money, but for accountability. The goal wasn't revenge. It was about correcting the lie. On paper, my childhood was built on something that never happened. They asked if I wanted to move forward. I gave them a clear yes. The paperwork was drawn up and submitted. We named my father as the primary respondent and listed the charges as emotional distress, defamation through fraud, and falsification of public records. We didn't ask for compensation, just formal recognition of what was done, and for the record to finally show the truth. The civil lawsuit officially moved forward in midsummer. We filed against my father for falsifying public records, emotional manipulation, and fabricating my mother's death to secure full custody. Alongside the complaint, my legal team submitted certified documentation proving that no official death certificate had ever been issued, along with current identification and legal residency records confirming that my mother, Samina, was very much alive and never declared deceased by any authority. My attorneys warned that the case might attract unwanted media attention, especially considering the unusual nature of the claim. I made it clear from the start, I wasn't interested in publicity. This was never about making headlines. I just wanted the official story corrected and the truth reflected on record. To prevent any unnecessary exposure, our lawyers requested a temporary gag order on public statements and filings. Predictably, my father retaliated. His team filed a countersuit accusing me of emotional harassment and defamation. It was a textbook move. Delay tactics, hoping to make things messy enough to force a settlement or withdrawal. We didn't budge. My aunt and uncle, both of whom had seen the original cover-up unfold, agreed to testify. Zara prepared to share what she found. Samina signed an affidavit detailing the years of intimidation, threats, and social isolation she endured after the separation. The court approved the gag order, but even then, word started circulating within the legal community. Some attorneys reached out to my lawyers privately, just to confirm the case details. Most were shocked it hadn't come out sooner. A week into pre-hearing proceedings, my employer's HR department contacted me. They had found out about the lawsuit, not through gossip, but because I had submitted time-off paperwork that flagged legal involvement. I was brought into a meeting with one of the directors. I expected a warning. Instead, they placed me on paid administrative leave and offered counseling support through the company's mental health network. I took the leave and stepped away from work completely to focus on preparing for the hearing. During that time, Samina and I combed through every file she had kept from the original custody case. Deep in a folder from a storage bin, we found transcripts from her hearings. They had been sealed at the time, but her attorney had managed to save a partial copy. The transcript confirmed she had never been declared unfit as a parent. Her court-appointed representation had failed to appear during one hearing. When she tried to reschedule, her request was denied. She was out of legal options, overwhelmed financially, and isolated by threats from my grandfather and father. While reviewing the case documents, we got another curveball. My stepmother filed for a restraining order, accusing me of harassment. According to her statement, I had shown up to her property multiple times and made threats. We pulled the timestamps and security footage showing I had not been near her home since the day I confronted her with the video. 3 people confirmed my location during the dates in question. The judge dismissed the case the same day. Then we discovered she had also been contacting relatives behind the scenes, threatening to reveal private family information if they testified on my behalf. One cousin forwarded us screenshots. Another shared a recorded phone call. We logged it all as part of our formal legal preparation. Around this same time, an elderly uncle, my grandfather's younger brother, asked to meet privately. He told me that he had helped organize the fake funeral. He said my grandfather was the one who ordered it done, saying it was necessary to protect the family's reputation. My uncle had stayed silent all these years, fearing the backlash. Now he wanted to make things right. He wrote and signed a formal witness statement, which we submitted to the court. Then Zara made a discovery that changed everything. While cleaning out the attic, she found a wooden storage box taped shut and wrapped in a plastic bag. Inside were over 30 unopened envelopes, all addressed to me. The return stamps were marked undeliverable. Some were over 15 years old. Inside were birthday cards, drawings, handwritten letters, printed emails, even small keepsakes from my early childhood. Samina had sent all of it over the years, trying to reach me. All of it was blocked or returned. We added the box to our file. It was physical proof that she had tried again and again to stay in my life. With sworn statements, documentation, and live witnesses ready, the judge set the civil hearing date for early fall. The court would finally hear everything, from start to finish, and the false version that had been protected for almost 2 decades was about to face the truth under oath. 3 days before the hearing, my father's legal team sent a settlement proposal through my attorney. It was straightforward, a substantial financial payment if I agreed to drop the case entirely, with no amendments to the public record, and no further legal action allowed. He offered to make it disappear quietly, no hearing, no testimony, no documents made public. His side clearly thought money would be enough to bury the truth one more time. I refused without hesitation. I told my lawyer to send back a clear message. This wasn't about revenge, and it definitely wasn't about money. The records had to be corrected. The lie had lasted too long, and it wasn't going to end with a payout. My legal team warned me again. Once this went to court, the details would come out. It wouldn't just be about the fake death anymore. It would expose every manipulation, every secret, every person who had stayed silent to protect the story. I told them to move forward. The trial date came quickly. The courtroom was quiet but full. On one side, my father walked in with two senior attorneys. He didn't look at me. On the other side, I sat beside Samina and Zara. Behind us were my aunt, uncle, and the cousin who had given us the original screenshots. They all chose to be there. Samina was the first witness. She stood calmly and recounted everything: the threats, the disappearance, the years of silence. She described how her letters had been returned, how her calls were blocked, and how the legal system had cornered her out of her child's life. She didn't break once. Next, my uncle took the stand. He admitted to helping stage the funeral and explained how my grandfather had pressured him into it. He said he had carried guilt for years and knew now that staying silent only let the lie grow. Then Zara testified. She held up one of the unopened envelopes from the attic box and explained what it was. She showed the return labels and told the court how she found the letters. Her voice was steady. When she finished, the judge asked to inspect the envelope himself. My aunt followed. She explained that she had known the truth for years, but was warned that speaking out would result in being cut off by the family. She confirmed that she had seen Samina after the separation and was told to say nothing. Her voice cracked, but she never hesitated. My father's lawyers tried to fight back. They presented mental health records from over 20 years ago, trying to suggest that Samina had been unstable. The judge cut them off. He reminded them the case was about fraud, not past diagnoses, and ruled the records inadmissible. Their entire defense strategy collapsed in that moment. Then my lawyers submitted our evidence: emails discussing the fake death, photos from the wedding, court transcripts, documents with missing official entries, and written statements from family members who had been silenced. Every page told the same story. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It had been planned, executed, and maintained for nearly 2 decades. When all the testimonies and evidence had been reviewed, the judge made his ruling. He declared that the original death status had been fraudulently constructed. He ordered the registrar to update the official records and strike any mention of my mother's death. Her legal identity would be restored. The story was now corrected where it mattered most: on paper and in public. While no criminal charges could be filed due to the statute of limitations, the court found my father liable for civil fraud and emotional damages. A financial judgment was awarded in my favor. I asked the court to direct part of that amount into an educational trust for Zara, which was approved. After the session ended, Samina sat quietly in the hallway outside the courtroom, tears in her eyes. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Zara stood beside her, holding her hand. My father walked out of the courthouse alone. He didn't stop. He didn't turn. That was the last time I saw him. I left the building with Samina and Zara on either side of me. We didn't talk about what came next. We knew there would still be conversations, adjustments, new challenges, but for the first time, everything ahead of us would be built on the truth. The lie that shaped my life was finally dead. The truth, no matter how delayed, had taken its place. A few weeks after the court verdict, a nonprofit organization that focuses on reform in family law reached out to my attorney. They had come across the court filings and wanted to include elements of the case in a national awareness campaign. Their focus was on documentation abuse, particularly how some parents have their identities erased or altered through unethical custody actions. I agreed to help under one condition: my mother's identity would remain private. I reviewed their drafts, gave feedback on the timelines, and helped them shape the story into an educational resource for other families who might be going through something similar. Around that same time, Zara graduated from high school with honors. She invited me to the ceremony and asked if I would walk her on stage during the recognition portion. It was a small moment in a crowded gym, but when she called me her brother in front of everyone, it felt like something permanent. We took photos afterward, her in a maroon gown, me in a suit I hadn't worn since the trial, both of us smiling like we'd known each other our whole lives. At the reception, I ran into someone I hadn't seen in years, a childhood friend from elementary school. We talked briefly, and he mentioned something that stopped me. He remembered seeing my mother at a school play years ago. He said she was sitting near the back and left before it ended. Back then, he asked someone about her and was told to forget it. Later that week, he dug through an old shoebox and sent me a grainy photo from the event. There she was, sitting quietly in the last row, watching me on stage. I added it to the folder of moments that proved she had never walked away. I started looking for a new place and eventually moved into a small house about 10 minutes from where Samina and Zara lived. It wasn't anything fancy, just a quiet home with enough space for a desk, a spare room, and a backyard. I set a schedule for weekly dinners with them, alternating who hosted each time. We created our own traditions: movie nights, grocery trips, random Sunday walks through nearby parks. Once the court had finalized the ruling, I submitted a formal request to amend my personal records. I asked to have Samina listed as my legal biological mother and removed all association with my stepmother. The update was processed a few weeks later. After that, I revised my medical records, insurance beneficiaries, and emergency contacts. Every form that once listed someone who lied to me now listed someone who had fought to reach me. During a quiet family dinner one weekend, Samina handed a wrapped bundle to my girlfriend. Inside was a baby album, leather-bound, carefully preserved, filled with photos, handwritten notes, and tiny milestones from my first years. There were pages I had never seen before, birthdays I had forgotten, baby shoes taped to the inside cover, a lock of hair tied in string. She had kept it all. I began writing everything down, not for publishing, but as a personal record, a memoir for my own family, something I could hand to Zara, or to someone years from now, so they would never hear the wrong version of what happened. I included the full timeline, court filings, screenshots, and letters. I wanted the truth to outlive us all. I also signed up to volunteer at a local legal aid center. They worked with adults trying to reconnect with estranged parents, often in complicated or manipulated family situations. I sat in on interviews, helped organize case notes, and answered basic questions. Sometimes just listening to people tell their stories was enough to make a difference. Therapy became part of my weekly routine again. Over time, I stopped waking up with anxiety about things I couldn't remember. I no longer felt like there was a piece missing. My legal name, records, and story now lined up with reality. Everything made sense. I wasn't angry anymore, just focused on what came next. I changed my phone number and blocked my father and stepmother from every platform, service, and provider I could find. There was no final message, no confrontation, just silence. It was the first time that silence felt like peace. The relatives who supported the lie were cut off for good. I didn't argue or explain, I just removed them, one by one. The ones who told the truth stayed in my life, quietly, respectfully. They knew what it cost. On the 1-year anniversary of the wedding video that started all of this, I watched it again. Same clip, same music, same shaky camera. At the exact timestamp, I paused the frame. There she was, sitting in that blue dress, smiling, clapping to the music. That 1 second had flipped my life upside down, and without it, I might never have known what really happened. I saved a still frame from that moment and kept it at the front of the baby album. Not as a reminder of what I lost, but of what I got back.